Welcome everyone to our second Romans class. I'm going to ask Roger, if he would, to lead us in prayer as we begin class this morning.
Our great God, we're thankful to be here this morning. We're thankful that you have given us the breath of life, and we rejoice in this Lord's Day, and we just thank you for slowing us down for a moment, seriously. And we can't tell you how much we thank you for Jesus Christ and the power of your word and the chance that we have to study this book. It's amazing the power that lies therein, the word of faith that is here in this book, and we know that our faith comes from this book, and we pray that you'll help us to study it and to know it better, that we can share it. And that's what our goal is, and we thank you for Mark and his ability. It's awesome, and we just look forward to seeing you face to face. Is our prayer in Jesus' name.
Amen. Amen. Thank you, Roger. I wanted to mention one thing that I forgot last week. This book is written during the time of Nero, who is the emperor of Rome. Nero reigns in Rome from 54 A.D. to 68 A.D. Okay? So I don't think I said that last week. So this book is written, or letter is written, probably 57, 58. This is during the reign of Nero. Most people believe it was Nero who, had Paul and Peter executed. And so I just wanted to let you know that that's what's happening. And in 66 A.D., the Jews are going to revolt. And that revolt is going to precipitate the Roman conquering or destruction of Jerusalem, which will happen in 70 A.D., 2 years after Nero dies. All right? So there is a sense in which this is coming at a time, Romans is coming at a time when there is one really bad ruler there. He's already showing himself by the time of the writing. So when Paul says that their faith in Rome has gone out as an example to all the world, it's in contrast to an evil emperor in Rome who has already kicked out the Jews for a while and is going to do some pretty erratic things during his rule in Rome. So I just want to make sure you got that. Sometimes I like to do a graphic organizer that might help you just see all of the chapter at one time. And so that's what I did up here for you this morning. I don't know whether this helps you. It helps me. It goes clockwise as far as order of what Paul does here. So to me, the theme of this first chapter is the gospel of Jesus Christ. Paul introduces himself as an apostle. He's called, he's set apart for the gospel. Then he introduces Jesus Christ, the Son of God. He is the descendant of David. He is the, I think that should be D-E-S-C. Sorry about that. Descendant of David, according to the prophecy, he's the center of the gospel. He is the centerpiece of the gospel that is brought about to man. Purpose of the gospel is to bring about the obedience of faith among all nations. He's going to start that with that theme. He's going to end with that theme in Romans the 16th chapter. You see that phrase, obedience of faith. The gospel is the power of God to salvation. He's not ashamed of it because it can bring about salvation to everyone, not just the Jew, but also to the Greek. And then finally, the gospel is necessary because Paul is going to begin an argument in chapter 1 that's going to go through chapter 2 and into chapter 3 because the wrath of God is revealed against all unrighteousness and ungodliness. And it's not going to matter how you did the unrighteousness or the ungodliness, because in chapter 1 he will level a charge against all Gentiles that without the law they did the unrighteousness and ungodliness, okay? And they're without excuse. And then in chapter 2, he's going to say the Jews who had the law are without excuse as well, because even having the law, they did exactly the same things that the Gentiles did. They were guilty of exactly the same things in their time period. And so in chapter 3, he's going to bring about all mankind under sin, and therefore worthy of the wrath of God, and worthy of the last statement of chapter 1, which is death. They're worthy of death. They're worthy of separation from God. And then he is going to show how God is the just, moral, pure, awesome, perfect God, and he's also the justifier of man. And how is that justification going to happen? Well, that's the theme of Romans, I believe. That is going to be by faith. The justification of man is going to be by faith. And that is going to be something that Paul will argue happened with individuals before they even were circumcised as a Jew and before they ever had the law of Moses. That justification process by faith goes all the way back to Adam and Eve. That anybody who's going to be justified is not going to be justified because of their moral goodness, because no one is morally good. Chapter 3 is going to level that. There's no one good, no one at all. And so the justification process has to happen through the gospel of Jesus Christ. Okay? So those are major theme statements and where we're heading with chapter 1. So what I wanted you to do this past week is look at some things in chapter 1 that I think are very important to Paul's overall argument and presentation in this book. And remember, if you weren't here last week, remember that Paul is not necessarily arguing this because the Romans don't believe it. He is presenting it, I believe, so that he is preparing the way for his visit to Rome. So that by the time he gets to Rome, they both are going to know, hey, this apostle has the gospel. You know, he is every bit an apostle of Jesus Christ. Now, why would Paul be suspect as an apostle and have to sometimes prove himself as an apostle of Jesus Christ? Why is that the case?
He didn't walk with Jesus.
I'm sorry, Lisa? Go
Because
ahead.
he used to persecute the Christians.
Okay, used to persecute the Christians for number one. All right, why else?
He didn't walk with Jesus. He wasn't there with him.
That's right. He wasn't of the original 12. He was called later. So I don't believe that the Romans have a problem in understanding the gospel. They may have some aspects of the gospel. I think that there is a problem in Rome between Jew and Gentile and wondering, hey, what's my place as a Gentile? What was my place as a Jew? Paul often argues in this book, then why this and why this? If Judaism isn't the end of what Paul or what God wanted, if it's not the end of it, then why have Judaism in the first place? Well, he's going to bring that about. He's going to help you understand. He's also going to help you understand how the Jews' rejection of God brought about certain things. I believe, and those of you who took the Matthew class in here with Tom, the Jews' rejection of Jesus Christ made God say to them, or not the rejection of Jesus Christ, the Jews' rejection of God made God say to them, you are no longer my people. Hosea makes that statement. You are not my people anymore. And yet the prophecy is made where it was once said, you are not my people, you will be called my people. You will be called the people of God. There's also a removal of the throne in the Old Testament. You are no longer my people, and you no longer have a throne, so to speak. The throne is now in heaven, okay? And the one sitting upon that throne is of the descendant of David, but he's not going to sit on earth. And that is one of the biggest problems in evangelical doctrine today. For 95% of the Christians, or those who call themselves Christians in America today, they believe that throne is going to somehow get back in Jerusalem, and Jesus is going to sit on it personally and in the flesh. Okay? So that's not a big argument of his, but it's just one that I want you to be aware of, because it is such a different system of belief when one looks at this and recognizes that Jesus is of the descendant of David. He's on the throne, but that throne is in heaven. Okay? All right. So, in your study of this first chapter, I just want to remark again that we're not going to have time to read this because there's so much richness. So that's going to be your job during the week, to read, to study. If you haven't seen the blog yet, I was going to put down the address, but it's really hard. It's really long too. So those blog addresses I get really long. So just go through Jenny to get the blog address, go through her email, or go back on the email that she sent out from Jenny Lee to everybody, and it will have the blog address, and then you can bookmark it and go there. And we've already done some discussions this past week on certain things, so I really encourage you to do that. And for anybody who wasn't here last week, your job this week, if you have not already done so, read the whole book of Romans in one sitting if you possibly can, from beginning to end. So you get a sense of this as a letter sent to the Roman Christians. Okay, so let's go through and begin looking at this. As Paul begins here, he's got, so much richness in the first 6 verses here. He kind of introduces himself, he introduces Jesus Christ. What's different about Paul as an apostle of this gospel? How is he different maybe from other apostles that you find in chapter 1? What's going to be his mark of uniqueness as an apostle? See, I'm going to stop and ask questions so I can drink water. Lots of questions. Okay? Anybody want to try that? Yes.
His apostleship was post-ascension. So Jesus called many of the other apostles, but not until after he had already ascended did he call Paul.
Okay, and so in calling Paul, what was his unique mission? Alicia?
Well, in verse 5 he says, to bring about the obedience of faith to the Gentiles.
Right. Okay. The gospel is there to bring about obedience of faith to everyone. But Paul's particular part of that scheme of man's redemption, he is called as an apostle to the Gentiles. You don't see any other apostle working among Gentiles as much as you see Paul. Now, I know that the apostle Peter was the first to preach to a Gentile. That's Cornelius, and his household was saved that day. Okay, but the apostle Paul is the one who really does the work. And if you're looking at your map and you're thinking about the Roman Empire from Spain all the way over here to Israel and beyond, or Judea and beyond, then Paul's gone right about here, right about to that blue mark. He's done missionary work in all of Asia Minor over here. He's done this missionary work. Already apostles have gone down to Egypt, They've all done Samaria and Judea. We don't know whether they went into the Parthian Empire over here. It's very possible that they did. But now Paul's going over here, and now he's set his mind on Spain, on Italy, on the western part of this empire. So, because that's his job. That's what he wants to do. His job is not to go and strengthen churches that other apostles have built. His job is to get out there and actually build churches and convert people in places where no one has ever been before. And he wants to have some fruit among those Roman Christians as well. All right? Okay, so then he introduces Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ is the Son of God. He's also the son of David. He's a descendant of David. So as you're looking at this descendancy, why is that important? And how is this important to the gospel of Jesus Christ? That he is a descendant of David. Now this is not mentioned in Romans chapter 1, but you need to know some prophecies, and I think that when something like this is mentioned, that he is promised beforehand through the prophets in the Holy Scriptures. By the way, if anybody ever says that the Old Testament is not inspired by God? Paul just said it was, okay? He said it right there, okay? It's inspired by God. So those are holy, set-apart scriptures. Then what's the idea of having David as Jesus as a descendant? Why did he have to be in David's line?
I was reading through Samuel before this class, and in like Samuel 7, or I had to go back to 2 Samuel 7, David says, I want to build a house for you to God, and God's like, you're the one to build me a house, I'm going to bring somebody through you that will build my house.
Right. Right, okay, so have that prophecy in your mind and have that scripture in your mind. Don't forget 2 Samuel 7. Okay, 2 Samuel 7 is a prophecy where Nathan tells David, yes, you will have a son that will build your house. Perfect example of primary fulfillment and secondary fulfillment in prophecy. Not all prophecies have a primary and secondary fulfillment, but this one does. Who was the literal son, first son, so to speak, of David, who built the literal house of God?
Solomon.
That's Solomon, okay? David was not allowed to build it because he had blood on his hands as a warrior. So Solomon's going to build it, okay? And God is going to place a covenant with David. And what's that covenant that he's going to give him? Everybody turn to 2 Samuel 7 right now, and let's look at that, because I think that's a huge prophecy that we need to have in our brain. Okay, you look at this, verse 12, 2 Samuel 7, when your days are complete, when you lie down with your fathers, I will raise up your descendant after you, who will come forth from you, and I will establish his kingdom. He shall build a house for my name, and I will establish the throne of his kingdom forever. Okay, there's the covenant. Look at this, verse 16. Your house and your kingdom shall endure before me forever. Your throne shall be established forever. Okay, now that's a very interesting prophecy, because the literal throne of David is not established forever in prophecy. In fact, in Jeremiah, the 22nd chapter, that throne is taken away from Jeconiah, and God says, there will be no descendant on your throne from here on out. But now look over to Acts, the 2nd chapter. The way that this prophecy is fulfilled forever, in this case, is through Jesus Christ sitting not on a literal throne, but on a spiritual throne. So in Acts, the 2nd chapter, when Peter is helping them understand what is going on when this Holy Spirit falls upon them and they have the tongues of fire, when he's helping them understand this, he says now in the beginning, about verse 24, he talks about, you guys have put him to death, Jesus, but Jesus raised him up again because it was impossible for him to be holden by death, or be held by the power of death. Verses 25 through 28, David prophesies that his body will not undergo decay. That's an interesting prophecy, okay? Well, again, he's not speaking of himself, because Peter says, hey guys, I want to tell you why that's not speaking of David's body. Because where is David's body? It's where? In Jerusalem.
Right over there?
Yeah, right over there. So let me tell you, folks, his bones are right over there, and you know where that grave is. You know where it is. His bones are in it. So that's not what David's saying, since he's a prophet of God. He says he's going to raise up one. All right, so then verse 29, he says, David's buried, his tomb is with us to this day, and so this prophet of God, he said God had sworn to him with an oath to seat one of his descendants on his throne. He looks ahead and speaks of the resurrection of Jesus Christ. He was not abandoned to Hades. His flesh did not suffer decay. He was in the flesh, raised from the dead. That's why they touched him. Okay? He was not an apparition. He was not a ghost. He was not in spirit form only when he was raised from the dead. He was in the flesh, and that flesh did not undergo decay. He was raised up in that same fleshly body. Therefore, and then he says, now he's seated at the right hand of God. Well, how do you know that that's a throne? Seated at the right hand of God. Who knows enough about ancients to know that that's a throne? Okay, this is a throne scene now. If you have the majesty sitting and you are sitting at the right hand, you are on a throne in ancient times. That makes you seated there. And so he says, he's at the right hand of God. He's having received this promise. And it was not David who ascended into heaven, but he said, the Lord said to my Lord, sit at my right hand. Okay, so you're sitting at my right hand. Jesus is seated on that throne at this time. He's made him both Lord and Christ. What does the word Christ mean? Messiah. And if the word Christ means Messiah, then that means literally in our language what?
Anointed.
Anointed one. And what does that mean in the time of kings?
He's a
King.
priest, he's a king.
Yeah, you get anointed. That's what happens. That's what Samuel did to David. Poured the oil over his head, ran down on his face. Okay, that's the anointing. He is the king. And so here's Jesus Christ coming back. So it's very important that Jesus is of the lineage of David. That's why Matthew and other writers make sure that they show him in the lineage of David. Alicia.
I was just going to make the point, too, that this isn't some obscure prophecy that was made to David that they didn't remember and repeat all the time. They did. And Psalm 89 is a good example of that.
Right.
It's a maskil or a teaching psalm, which they would have sung all the time. And it says in verse 3, 89, I made a covenant with my chosen. I have sworn to David my servant, I will establish your seed forever and build up your throne to all generations.
Yeah.
So just to make the point that this was huge to them. They all knew this, and this was something they sang of and talked about all the time.
And their misconception may have been that it was going to be the physical throne, which may have precipitated, unfortunately, what they did with the Romans in 66. It's time. The Messiah is here. Even Jesus said of that time, don't be thinking the Christ is there. They're pointing out the Christ is here, the Christ is there. He's coming. Because I think that's what the Jews thought were going to happen. They're going to revolt against the Romans, and the Christ is going to appear as a physical king. He's going to wipe out everybody, and we're going to be there forever. And then what happened? But Jesus foretold of what's going to happen. And Peter in the gospel is trying to say, hey, this throne is up there in heaven. And Jesus said that in John to Pilate. My kingdom is not of this world. If it were, my servants would fight, that I would not be delivered to you. So this is in the entire plan of God for this to happen. For him to be of the descendant of David, but not be a physical king. By the way, there's one more question and then we'll move on, because we got to move on. If he's a physical king on the throne, I want to ask you a question. Can he be the priest? No. Why not?
Not from Levi.
He's not from Levi, folks. So you bring Jesus down to earth and you've lost your priesthood. And you've lost your high priest. That's an amazing thing that I think a lot of people aren't getting. If he's going to be a physical king, he has to be of the descendancy of Levi. He is not a king that way, and he's not a priest that way. Hebrews says he's a priest after the order of whom?
Melchizedek.
Melchizedek. Was Melchizedek in the line of Levi?
No.
No, he wasn't. How was he made a priest?
Through God.
Through God. God made an oath, promised him, just said, by the word of his power, you're a priest and a king. And he was. When God comes down and tells you you are something, you are. Okay? And so he declares that same oath to Jesus Christ. You're a priest and you're a king. I declare you such. So he's not after the order of Levi. He's after the order of Melchizedek. And you bring him down to earth, and he's a king, physically, okay, but he's not a priest. And that wrecks your whole sacrificial system. I don't know why people want to do that and how they miss that point. Okay? All right, let's move on now in Romans to another thought here. What do you think this obedience of faith is? What does that really mean, the obedience of faith? Why is this the purpose of the gospel and certainly his mission to bring this about? What does that really mean? It's not a huge, deep thing, but what do you just think that means when he says, I'm going to bring about the obedience of faith among this group? Got it, Lord.
Well, he goes through Romans talking about how the law won't save you. So obedience by the law is not going to save you. Obedience through your faith is what will.
Okay, that is a major point, because Paul will declare that obedience by law will not get you saved. Why? Because nobody kept it perfectly. Okay?
If you
Yes.
kept it perfectly, then it's no longer by grace. It's a debt that God would owe you.
That's exactly right. He will make that argument in Romans as well. If any of you have kept the law of God perfectly, you do not need grace. You do not need the mercy of Jesus Christ, nor do you need his sacrifice. You are perfect, and there's no reason for you to be a recipient of the wrath of God, because you've never done anything wrong. So the obedience by law is not going to cut it. And that was a major Jewish problem. They kept thinking, well, we kept that law pretty good. And you know what? That's a major problem among people today. What do you think? We'll go down to question 6. What might be the danger in a morally upright person reading verses 18 through 32? And they say, well, I'm not an adulterer. I wasn't disobedient to my parents, for the most part. I don't lie all the time. I'm not a homosexual. I don't do those things. What's the problem with a morally upright person looking at that, Roger?
Establish your own righteousness.
Yeah.
So you're saying you're without sin.
Right.
I'm good enough.
I'm good enough?
God hasn't given me over to do these things.
Correct. Exactly. So to the Jewish mind and to the morally upright person, then they kind of put themselves with this balance figure. I've done a lot more good things and done a lot less bad things than that person over here, therefore I'm saved. Well, you can always compare yourself to somebody that's just nuts and insane and evil through and through. I look pretty good next to Hitler. But Hitler and me are both on the same boat when it comes to sin. Because I've sinned and he's sinned. Okay? So that's something that is a problem with people. And it's a problem with people today. And Romans is the perfect letter to help somebody who looks at you. And how many times have you heard this argument, or you heard somebody else who's heard this argument? Hey, I'm a good person. God's going to save me. You have to be able to make an argument like Paul. Well, really, when you say you're a good person, does that mean you're a sinless person? And then get them to understand that point, because I know how we can use that word. All right. Okay, so it's the obedience that springs from faith that we want in all of the world. That should be our mission to do the same thing. That's why we want to go to China. That's why we want to go to Ukraine. That's why we support in the Philippines. That's why we want to go anywhere. Okay? That's why we want to go to downtown Los Angeles or downtown Chicago. Because we want to bring about the obedience of faith. The obedience that comes through a faith in God. Okay, so then Paul continues on, and I'm not going to go through verse 7 all the way through 15, because we basically did that last week. All right, look at verses 16 and 17. Here's a declaration of Paul. Why not be ashamed of the gospel of Jesus Christ? Why not be ashamed of it?
Because it saves us.
Okay, all right. It's true. It brings about salvation. Here's the thing. Let me ask you this question. Why would you be ashamed of your car? It's dirty, okay.
Maybe because everybody can't have one like you have. or something like that. So you.
Okay, a bad analogy, I guess.
But the
Bad
gospel
question.
is for everyone.
Okay, yes, that's true. I was trying to get this as an answer. You can be ashamed of a car that keeps breaking down, that doesn't fulfill its purpose. I bought that car, it's a lemon. You know, it keeps breaking down. It does not fulfill its purpose. It doesn't get me from point A to point B. Why isn't Paul ashamed of the gospel of Christ?
It's perfect.
It does exactly what it is supposed to do. It never fails in the believer. You understand that? It does not fail in the one who says, I will put my trust and faith in Jesus Christ and the work that He did on the cross to take away my sin. It does not fail. It brings about the intended purpose every time. That's a beautiful thing. So why be ashamed of it? To Paul, he's never ashamed of that. Now, I know in other people's minds, they might ridicule the gospel. In fact, Paul says in 1 Corinthians that the gospel to the Jews is a what? Stumbling block, and to the Greeks it's what? It's foolishness. I mean, to the Greek mind that had all these great philosophers like, Socrates and Plato and Aristotle and the rest of them, and Epicurean and all these kind of people, these are such complex things, that only the brilliant and the sophisticated people and the wise people of the world can understand. The gospel just seems way too easy and simple. And so to the Greeks, they stumbled over it because they thought it was foolish. To the Jews, they stumbled over it because they thought, He's the king. The king, like Alicia said, we've been looking for forever. That guy. So he didn't fit the profile of what the king was supposed to be. So the gospel can look very foolish to people who are not a believer. And that's why Paul says, it is the power of God for salvation to whom?
Jew first.
Yeah.
Also,
Right, to everyone who believes, the Jew first and also to the Greek. It's to everyone, all right? And it's powerful, and it gets the job done. But to the non-believer, does it get the job done? No, because God's way is a way of faith. So to the non-believer, the gospel doesn't get the job done at all. Wasn't intended. It was not intended to save the non-believer. If that's the case, then the gospel preaches a message that all mankind is saved, whether you believe or not. That's not the message. All right. Now let's get into this wrath of God thing. I asked this question, and this brought about a lot of talk on the blog. And I really appreciate Wes's questions about this, and it's a tough question. Okay.
Excuse me, did you get into 17? Did you talk about 17, faith to faith?
No, you want me to?
Yeah.
Chastise me, man, if I don't do what you want me to do. No, I want you to do that. Okay. Yeah. Okay. What is meant? I was going to move back there.
Oh, I'm sorry.
But that's all right. But sometimes I don't go in the order. All right. That I'm going to put down here. I will get back there. Okay. Let's look at this wrath of God for a moment. Why is the wrath of God revealed? The gospel is revealed. The wrath of God is revealed. There's three things that are revealed in chapter 1. The gospel's revealed, the wrath of God is revealed, and according to Paul, there's a revelation to anybody who doesn't even get the word revelation by the fact of the creation. The creation reveals something to people. Okay? So that's really important there. So why is the wrath of God revealed?
Well, verse 18 says it's against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who suppress the truth in unrighteousness.
Okay. All right. So it's going to be against unrighteousness and ungodliness. Now, if you've read the book of Romans, do you get unrighteousness without law? Is that possible?
No.
No. Do you get sin without law?
No.
No, not possible. Okay? If I don't have traffic laws, I can't break the traffic code. It's not possible for me to. I can go any speed I want to, and nobody could say, oh, you broke the law. There is no traffic law. Okay, so the fact that there is unrighteousness and godliness then proves that there is a law. Okay, so the wrath of God's revealed. In fact, the wrath of God is revealed to those who didn't even receive a law in the same manner of the Jews, who had this coded law. Now, I had a discussion with my daughter last night about this, and I'm going to give you a little history lesson right here, which I think is important. 1750 BC, you have a guy named Hammurabi in Babylon, okay? He records 282 laws on a stela, a very large kind of pillar that we have today. I want to go see it one day. It's like seriously an important archaeological find. It's in the Museum of London. Okay, so it's there. One of those laws was eye for eye, tooth for tooth law. Moses brings about that law later on, 500 years later. Writes it down, scribes it down, 1250 BC. Interesting, isn't it? Now, so you might say, oh, Moses borrowed it from the Babylonians. No, he didn't. No, he didn't. Here's the point. The point is that the eye for eye, tooth for tooth law was a normal law among the ancients. It was a moral law. It was the way they dealt with things. It was not an unusual law. It was not. It wouldn't be unusual to the Jews whatsoever. This was just scribing it down. The fact of the matter is that Paul makes the argument that what should the Hindu, the heathen, the anybody know? The person who does not know the one God of the Bible, what should the polytheist know about God by the creation? What should he know? Yeah, that he's eternal and he has eternal power. In other words, and this was the question that Wes had, and I don't want to go any further than this, Wes and the rest of you, but when you look at the creation, you have no excuse if you look at the creation and come away from it saying, came about through man, or came about by chance, or came about in any other way than to look at that creation and say, there has got to be one big divine being that did this. It's too beautiful, it's too complex, it's too intricate. Okay? Yes, sir.
I was just wondering if you or anybody else knows if any other religion had their God is credited with creating everything, the universe, the earth.
Well, ancient religions had gods that were accredited, with creating everything. Yeah, the Egyptians did, the Babylonians did. A lot of ancient gods did that, all right? The Buddhists today don't have a creating God. They don't have God. You have to understand, there is no God in Buddhism, all right? Hinduism is very unusual that way, too. Yes?
Islam believes in the same creator
Certainly.
God.
That they believe in the same God as a Christian and a Jew. That's all the same God, and they believe in it. Go
I was
ahead.
going to make a simple point that a simple way that I look at this and that I teach the kids to look at it is when you see the creation, you see the eternal power and divine nature. Those aren't really words we use, but we might think, I see somebody that's bigger than me and different from me.
Right. Bigger and different. Good way to put it, okay? And they should have known those things. Joel?
There's no civilization that's been discovered by archaeologists that is completely atheistic.
Correct.
And
Yeah.
I think outside of the three Abrahamic religions, I don't think any religion that I've heard of has one God that did everything also.
I agree with you. I don't know of any religion that did that either. There are some Persian religions, but they have two gods, okay? A bad God and a good God. Yes, Roger.
The phrase in verse 19 that said, "For God made it evident to them." Does he make it evident to us by the creation, or
Yes,
another way?
in that reference, he's talking about the creation. when I look at it, it's evident to all humans that there is somebody, as Alicia says, bigger than I am and different than I am, and I'm amenable to him. Okay? And that means that there should be law. Okay? However, the other revelation, this revelation, is not evident to people unless we take it to them. And that's why he says in chapter 10, how beautiful are the feet of those who bring the good news to people who don't know, basically. My paraphrase.
And that's why it has to be coupled together, because you can look at creation and say, okay, there's someone bigger than me and
Right.
different than I am, but we don't necessarily know that it's one God.
Correct.
It could be many gods. And so we couple that proof of eternal power and divine nature with God's revelation, and then he instructs us about who he is. And so then we don't have all of the other gods.
Correct.
It has to be coupled together.
Correct. And that segues now into the question that Roger had. Why is the gospel necessary? Yes, because of the wrath of God, but also because the evidence of the existence of God is not enough to bring about, according to God's plan, to bring about the salvation of man. Therefore, there has to be gospel good news. There has to be a revelation of a different kind. So 2 revelations are really spoken about in chapter 1. The revelation of the creation of the universe as we look at it and contemplate it. And secondly, the revelation of the gospel of Jesus Christ, who has as the central figure Jesus Christ, who is born of the son of David, who is in that descendancy, okay, and who's going to bring about everything that God wants, all centered upon him. And that's going to be, as he says in verse 17, the righteous they're going to live by faith. Does anybody know where that's taken from? That's a prophecy and a statement in the Old Testament. But the righteous or just shall live by faith. That's Habakkuk, the 2nd chapter. Do you remember Habakkuk's, I've got 2 minutes to tell you the story of Habakkuk and get back to faith. Okay, remember Habakkuk's question to God? Why is all this evil happening in my country? Why don't you do something about it? And God's answer, Habakkuk just was stunned at. I'm bringing the Babylonians to take care of the wickedness that's going on in your country. Whoa. And then Habakkuk's like, so always be careful what you wish for or ask for. So he asked for somebody to take care of the wickedness. And he said, what? The Babylonians? I can't. They're more wicked than we are. How can you do this? And God's answer to him is, let me tell you something. The arrogant are going to be brought down, but my humble, just one shall live by faith. And so Habakkuk finds the answer of how to deal with the wickedness of the world being used by a perfect God in order to punish those who are wicked to him, to God, that is. But he learns in all of this that the just are going to live by faith, that the trust that you have in God. Didn't Ezekiel say that some of the righteous are going to die in this destruction of Jerusalem? Didn't Ezekiel say that? Didn't the prophet say some of the righteous are going to die? Now, here's the question. Did everyone who died go to hell? That's the question. No. The physical death is of little consequence to our God in heaven. You have to understand that to us it's like, you know. But to God in heaven it's not a big thing. The loss of the soul is the big thing. The destruction of the soul is huge to God. But the body is just here to house the spirit for a short period of time. So then, if the righteous are going to live by faith, then the righteousness of God is revealed from faith to faith. From the body of faith that is delivered. Jude 3. The faith that was once for all delivered unto the saints was given to you. So in the sense that the faith on one side is a body of truth that you must believe. And when you believe it, what does it produce in the individual? Faith. So it's from faith to faith. It's from a body of belief to a personal trust in that body of information. And so that's how it's revealed. It's from this gospel of faith to the faith inside my heart or my mind. Alicia?
Now, if you're reading the NIV, you are not going to get that. Because
Okay.
that translation isn't. I mean, it says it's revealed from. Here's what it says. In the gospel, a righteousness from God is revealed, a righteousness that is by faith from first to last.
Yeah.
And that phrase doesn't imply the same thing.
I agree. Now remember, the NIV translators are going to be faith-only people. Okay? So they have a leaning. I'm not saying that translation is absolutely wrong. It leans toward a certain doctrine. By the way, in this class for Romans, I will be using New American Standard Version almost exclusively in this class. So you'll hear me using words like that constantly in its wordage, because I think it's very, very important. There are a couple of unfortunate translations by NIV and Romans. Flesh is translated sinful nature. I don't like that one either. I think that helps somebody think of my flesh as, significantly and eternally damned and depraved when I was born. And Paul denies that in the book of Romans. So I'm hoping that you guys for this class will kind of stay with me on the New American Standard updated version. I think that will be a good version for you to use. New King James would be a good one as well.
And Mark, I found, sorry to interrupt, but I found an even more literal translation of that was helpful for me when it says, therein is revealed a righteousness of God by faith in order to faith. So that in order to faith really helped me make the connection that it is from the body of the gospel,
right,
that this righteousness of God is revealed in order to my faith, or in order to the unbeliever's faith.
Excellent. Good. Okay. Go ahead, Roger.
I need some more information. I mean, like, is it from me to you? Is that what we're saying? From you to me, or from us to other people?
No.
From my faith to your faith to get it transported?
No, it's from the faith as a body of truth that is revealed from God. Because the revelation of the creation is not enough to save mankind. So he's going to reveal the faith. So Jude says in verse 3, here's how he uses it as a body of faith. I wrote to you to contend or fight earnestly for the faith which was once for all time delivered to the saints. Okay, here's a body of information that is delivered, and when I believe it, what does it bring about in me? It brings about a trust and a belief and a faith in me to obey God. All right? Yes, sir.
Along with that, I think to help me understand what's going on in that is to understand that faith, from the conception of faith in my heart through the gospel message, is it's progressive to a point of this obedience of faith. So there's a lot of folks that we're interacting with and stuff that have a seed of faith, so to speak, that the gospel message is resonating and they're processing it, and so it is producing faith in them, but it hasn't gotten to the point of obedience of faith where they now surrender to the Lordship of Jesus Christ. And so I think that kind of helps me understand this from faith to faith, because that to faith means that there's a direction, like Kurt's translation brought out there, that there's a progression going on with that faith that this body of truth is producing.
Great. Good point. Okay, final things I want to say. Just to remind you of some things. Number one, when you came in today, you guys did a great job of filling up this part and leaving that part for those that might be a little bit late. Thank you very much. Number 2, going to use the New American Standard Version. I already said that. Number 3, I do need someone who can be